Hey guys, it's Catch Hell. Well, it's been about a month and I'm only halfway done with fabrication. I've relearned CAD modeling with Rhino, painfully learned how to 3D print with my Ender 3 Pro by Creality, and ultimately have come out with an electric motor mount for the 67 Honda. I'll take you through all the steps it took to go from a cardboard design to a final product. Let's go. So, we're going to be splitting this video into two parts. One, because it's taking a long time to fabricate a lot of the pieces intended to mount the engine and the battery. So let's talk shop. A lot of work has gone into the bike this past month. Just in terms of 3D printing, I even ended up getting into some welding and broke out the angle grinder. I didn't really want to do that for this project, but ultimately decided I needed to do it. But I've gotten to a good stopping point and wanted to get a video out so I can show you guys the process I'm going through and the amount of time this whole thing is taking for this part of the project. There will be a part 2 to the fabrication because I eventually want to 3D print carbon fiber nylon, which is going to require a little bit more expensive material, a little bit more time, as all the parts will be printed fully solid. Right now, all of the parts that I'm printing have an infill of 10% in terms of 3D printing. It's taking about 8 hours to print each of these, which I'll just do overnight. These right here are the motor mounts that I'll go into a little bit more here soon. I'm in a good spot with the mounts in that I like how it works, how it fits in the frame. The plastic is actually pretty rigid, which is pretty awesome, and the motor's all lined up where I want it in terms of the swing arm and positioning on the frame. So how did I get from all of these versions to the final product? I'll show you that right here. You have two separate parts that connect together, 4 bolts into the motor, and then each side of the frame will have 2 bolts on each side. And then inside the frame, there's a steel bar that it meshes with. This mount is basically flush with this steel bar on the inside. I think you get the picture. For the motor itself, I've got the sprocket in line with the swing arm, which is just perfect. All right, so first start with just getting some cardboard inside the frame, laying it all out, outlining the bolt holes, and eventually scanning it onto my computer. Once I've got it onto the computer, I load it up onto my 3D software program, which right now I'm using Rhino. Why did I choose Rhino? A few of my friends use it for work and spoke pretty highly of it, so it was a pretty easy choice for me. However, there are loads of 3D CAD programs out there that you can use, and they all interface well with 3D printing. Once you build the design on Rhino, you'll export the design itself as a STL and then bring it into a program called Creality Slicer. At least that's what I use. This program will then create the code for the 3D printer to actually print the part. In terms of the process of getting to version 1 from the cardboard, it probably took about 2 days for me to feel comfortable with that part and actually printing it and using it for the motor. So version 1, I printed both sides of the mount. You'll see I had 2 bolts on each side, the mounts on the frame, the mounts for the motor. With this, I was able to get an idea where the motor would actually mount onto these and realized that I needed to shift the holes a little bit, and that's just based on the motor positioning within the frame. I wanted the sprocket on the motor to be in line with the swing arm and needed it to get to a certain spot. That got me to version 2. I still had to figure out a little bit more about where to cut out the mount so you wouldn't see it on the frame looking at it from the side. Eventually I got to version 3 and got all that excess plastic off. From there I figured out I needed to shift the mount a little bit more. As you can see here, that line gives you an idea of how I knew to shift these mounts down. Then eventually I got to version 4, which was honestly pretty close. That got me to the point where I needed to put the holes in for the actual motor. Ultimately, I did a little bit more design with version 4 and got to version 5. I had a few issues with my 3D printer at this point in terms of the leveling of the bed. So with the level off, you ultimately get products like this overnight, which is really just a shitty feeling. I had a few days where I had to figure out the leveling out, but eventually I got it down. This here is version 6. This print is a lot cleaner. The mounts were in a better position, and I finally got to the point where I needed to figure out a way to get a nut inside here. However, my engine mount needed to be this far back, so this hole and my eventual hole for the motor were going to interfere in some capacity, and I had to minimize that. I played a little bit more with this one in terms of motor positioning to get the holes in the right spot, and eventually got me to version 8. I now had the holes in the mount. This one was just a little bit off, so I had to drill it to get it right. But I did get this groove set in here for the nut, so it would self-tighten when I got it on. That got me to a very close product for version 9. Ultimately, I got both sides here, and they just snapped together. This one's a little bit tight, so I had to fix the tolerances, but you get something where it self-tightens onto the mount. Some issues I did have though, I had to learn how to create supports. So you'll see in here that there's a little bit of plastic support for printing this hole. I didn't know how to do that, so it took a little bit of time for me to figure that part out. I eventually got it, and ultimately you just put a knife in here or flathead and it'll pop it out. This way you can print overhangs and holes in the part, and really if the printer doesn't have that part to print, it's just gonna print over open air, drop that plastic and mess up the part. So pretty huge aspect to it. So once I had this fixed, I fixed the tolerances on the latching mechanism, learned how to do the support structures for the holes. Right now I have a near final product. This is it right here. I still have a little bit to figure out, but it's super close. I'm probably going to do one more final print just to verify, but after this, I'm going to shift over to carbon fiber nylon. Overall, I'm super happy with how this turned out. The process was fun. Learning all of the 3D printing and programs that led to it was also a good time, but took a lot longer than I expected. Now, the other thing I've been working on is a turn signal holder for the front of the bike. I want 2 turn signal holders on each side of the top triple tree at the front. They will just bolt into the triple tree. On the original version, there would just be these reflectors on the side of the triple tree, so I thought it would be a great spot to put turn signals. This was a good project for me to continue to work on these printing skills. This right here is the final product. This is actually 2 separate pieces just based on how many overhangs that are inside this part. Honestly, I would say it's pretty much impossible to print this as one part, so you have to print it as 2. But the turn signal just screws in, you have a nut inside here to keep it tight, and then the wire comes out the side and through the triple tree. I'm really happy with how this came out. The final thing that I've been working on this last month is welding, grinding, and then getting this frame into a decent product, where ultimately I'll drill some holes into the frame for the battery mount. I decided that I'm not going to have a gas tank as well. For this bike, I just don't need it. It's going to go right where I want to put the battery, and I think it's going to look pretty badass with that battery right there as it is. So I had to create a flush surface for the battery mount. So I grinded the lip off, did a pretty shabby job of welding it back together with some steel I got from the hardware store, and grinding down the weld. Once I have those holes drilled out, I'm just going to use some bolts and nuts to get the battery mounted. In part 2 of fabrication, the battery will be mounted, the engine will be mounted, and there'll probably be some Bondo on that frame to get a nice clean surface. Let me know what you guys think so far. I'm super curious to see if you guys have any recommendations moving forward. Anyways, I'll catch you guys on the next one. Catch hell.